Assalamu alaikum and welcome to American Islamic College. We are thrilled to have you join us today and a very warm welcome to those who are joining us online. We want to begin today by acknowledging that our campus sits on land that was originally entrusted to the indigenous peoples of Turtle Island. As an Islamic-oriented institution of higher education, we believe that we must stand for justice even when we ourselves may be implicated, as that is what God calls on us to do. AIC welcomes students of all faiths and backgrounds. We offer undergraduate and graduate degrees, and we coordinate a number of programs such as this one. So please take a look at the brochures on your chairs for those of you who are here. And for the rest of you, you can visit our website, www.aicusa.edu, to learn more. And I'm here after the program too if you have any questions. So the AIC Alumni Journeys is a platform that we started for our graduates to honor them and amplify their contributions to the Muslim American landscape. So today we're honored and excited to have Tauseef Akbar here. He's the only AIC alumnus who holds both a Master of Arts and a Master of Divinity from AIC. Tauseef is currently the Associate Director of Muslim Life at the University of Chicago. He advises, facilitates, advocates for, and supports the vibrant and diverse Muslim community on their campus. As a chaplain, Tauseef also offers spiritual care and counseling to the whole campus community. Previously, Tauseef served as chaplain of Muslim and Interfaith life at Carleton and St. Olaf Colleges in Minnesota. Tauseef also enjoys discussions around shared interests in Islamic and religious studies, literature, history, creative writing, graffiti, travel, and chess. So thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulullah. I want to begin by thanking AIC so much for this invitation to speak. It's a real honor and to be part of this alumni journey series, of which there's so many really wonderful alumni and some who I had the privilege to be with, and others who preceded me. So it's a really humbling thing to be part of this series. And I also appreciate everyone who showed up here as well as online, and that I hope, inshallah, that I can share some things that'll be of benefit today. So when I was thinking about what to speak about initially, I was having some difficulty. I really wasn't sure what to share, considering the title, Alumni Journeys. It had to be something related to my journey, of course, and I was thinking, what do I really have to offer? And Romana, alhamdulillah, had really helpfully provided some suggestions. One was to do a talk about my MA thesis, which is something I really considered. In short, my thesis was about the place of Wahdatul Wujud in the thought of the poet saint Sultan Bahu from the Punjab. He lived in the 17th century during the Mughal era, and it was an interest of mine just to come to know about this concept, how it developed, how it kind of spread in the Punjab. And his poems are known in the subcontinent as Sufiyana Kalam, right? Or ecstatic and devotional poetry that conveys deep and illuminating truths in simple language. So the Punjabi language wasn't the language of the scholars. It wasn't really a written language. It was a language that was used, though, by the scholars, the poet saints, to kind of spread the message of Tawheed and spread the message of Islam amongst the people of Punjab. I wanted to play one of the popular poems, but I'm not prepared for that. But the poem's name is Alif Allah Chambe Debuti. And the poem is pretty short. It's 4 verses. And I'll just recite a little bit of it to give you a little taste of his poetry and his thought. Alif, Allah is like the jasmine plant which the Master planted in my heart. Who? He watered my veins with negation and affirmation. Who? Blossoming, the bush spread its fragrance through me. Who? Long live my completed guide, Bahu, who has planted this shrub. Who? Maybe one day, inshallah, I can return to this topic in a future talk or opportunity that we have here. But today I chose to talk about Muslim chaplaincy and kind of my journey through Muslim chaplaincy. to explore the questions about what it is that Muslim chaplains do. How is Muslim chaplaincy different from Christian chaplaincy? Which, if we were to keep it real, is what comes to mind for a lot of people still to this day when we talk about chaplaincy. And I will situate the answers to these questions within a broader narrative of my journey and some lessons that I've learned along the way and that I think may be of benefit to share here. So I want to start with the barakah at the beginning of things. And I want to start sharing a bit from the keynote speech that DePaul chaplain Abu Noor Abdul Malik Ryan gave at AIC's spring graduation in 2019, which I had the good pleasure of being a part of. He spoke about the barakah in the beginning of things, how there are so many blessings of being a part of something that is small and then grows large because of the efforts of those involved, the sacrifices, the overcoming doubts and disagreements and differences and struggles. And this is a really true statement, and it really struck a chord with me that there is barakah in the beginnings of things, even though we might not see it. And something that we have all experienced at some point, whether in our own personal journeys or in an institutional setting. And it is the case that if we look at the Prophet ﷺ's mission, that for many, many years, it was a small group that slowly grew over time. And in relation to this, Abu Noor gave the example from the novel Anne of Green Gables, in which she has this dialogue with Marilla, her foster parent. Do you never imagine things different from what they really are? Asked Anne wide-eyed. No. Oh, Anne drew a long breath. Oh, Miss Marilla, how much you miss. And Abu Noor quoted this because Anne was a romantic and a dreamer, and she had a very great and a very big imagination. And he tied this to how people with an imaginative vision can see things, not just how they are, but how they could be. And this enables them to get in on things at the beginning, at the start, when they are not fully developed. And to experience the barakah of supporting and helping to develop them, which other people might miss out on sometimes. And what Abu Noor said really struck with me that day. It was beautiful and poignant and so true and a real romantic vision. And I like to think that I have a big imagination and vision. I am definitely a dreamer, right? To a fault sometimes. But I think for me, it was something else, this experience with AIC in many ways, right? There's some overlap with that, but it was something else in some significant ways. I wasn't like Khadija or Ali or Abu Bakr radiallahu anhum, who could see ahead, who had unswerving yaqeen on al-Amin, right? For me, Allah placed me in the right place at the right time. If I were to continue the analogy, I was hanging around Zamzam when the call reached me. You know? And I say that because everyone's journey is just a little bit different. The conception we have in our mind of our dreams and how we will make them come to fruition almost never goes to plan. I tell students that we know Sirat al-Mustaqim, but our relation to that straight path isn't linear. It isn't the shortest distance between 2 points. I advise them not to fall for these carefully curated online sheikh and sheikha and celebrity personas. We do an exercise to really think and reflect about our relationship to Allah. I do an exercise with these students to reflect on our relationship with Allah, to get real, to think about the journey in between inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un, and to plot what that relationship actually looks like for us, right? Like you take a piece of paper, you know, and we won't go to alam al-arwah, but you know, the year you were born, and then you plot lines out, right? And we ask, what does it look like, for example, when we've experienced grief? We plot that out on the line. We ask, when is it that we've slipped up or erred or made mistakes or harmed others or been oppressive to others or to ourselves? And then after all of that, and that could be a day, that could be several days, that could be several meetings, we asked the question of what is it that held us down in place at those times? What is it, or who was it that helped stabilize us in that moment when we required spiritual triage? And maybe it's not like that crisis to that level of triage, but something that, is significant. And then we talk about what are some of the strategies that we can work on and develop to address issues, whether that be around salah, family, work, our mental and physical health. And so I returned to the fact that I was just hanging out by this metaphorical Zemzem without even knowing it in 2015 at my apartment on Marine Drive. I was in the process of the end of a marriage. I was dissatisfied with my work, which at one time I loved and enjoyed, but there I was in the combination of burnout. I was at that place of burnout, low wages, and general soul-crushing nonprofit-related problems. Familial expectations were piling on. When are you going to settle down and stop being a nomad? And when are you going to get a real job, right? And I have, mashallah, 2 really successful older siblings that I'm really proud of, mashallah, right? Look at their examples. Why can't you be like them? And I was encouraged to do what a lot of people in the community were doing at the time. A crash course in computer programming or server setup and maintenance, and I was told there's a guy on Devon, he does it all, right? He offers all of this. And many of my friends or cousins who took this route were making close to or near or above 6 figures. It had the allure of fast and easy money. And so I considered this path, but for me, deep down, it wasn't appealing. I knew deep down inside of myself that this is something that I just could not do. And yet I still wanted something with meaning and mission. I wanted something of the mind and of the heart, right? And it was then that I read a post on Facebook by a dear friend, Mike Swice, who's from Tauseef. And, for those who don't know, in the early days, Tauseef used to meet just here at what are the dorms that now house the refugees. And that's where the Musalla was at, and that's where Tauseef used to have its programming. And he wrote, and he mentioned how AIC is offering these scholarships for anyone who wants to take part and who gets admitted into the program, right? So I took the GRE. I learned about the history of and the great legacy of the kind of like the early years of AIC when Ismail Raji al-Faruqi was the president here, and then Akbar Muhammad, the son of Elijah Muhammad, who, went to Azhar and, trailblazed and doesn't get enough credit for those things, and so many others. And then up until recently, I know she's emeritus now, Marcia Hermanson. And so kind of like a who's who kind of Chicago Muslim scholars and workers and activists. And so I learned that with the scholarship, I was able to pursue an MA in Islamic theology, part-time in the evenings while working full-time in the day. And over the next several years, I came to really appreciate the balance that was struck between my professors, Dr. Giannati, Dr. Omar Awas, Dr. Jawad Qureshi, Dr. Deborah Majid, and Dr. Shaban Amir, a balance between Western academia and traditional knowledge. They all came from diverse scholarly backgrounds and perspectives, but always challenged us to the utmost. And as I was finishing up my MA, as I was finishing up that thesis on Sultan Bahu, I had a pivotal conversation with Dr. Faryal Salem about AIC's new reconstructed kind of chaplaincy program. It convinced me to seriously consider pursuing an MDiv here. Dr. Salem would become an excellent, tough, but generous guide and mentor on my path to chaplaincy. And guess what? If you are a graduate student, you are expected to live up to that. You are expected to read those 500 pages for class. If you thought you were going to simply coast through, then you were in for a rude awakening. And one personal experience that I will mention that I also saw as a sign to kind of pursue this vocation was the passing of a fellow student, Howard. Howard was an elder. He was from Brooklyn. He had a very strong Brooklyn accent. I always used to greet him, Howard from Brooklyn. And that's terrible. I know people from New York are going to hate me. But he had a wonderful Brooklyn accent. And I loved class with him. I loved going to classes with him because he would always ask interesting questions that no one else would think about, right? And his engagement with the text was so interesting. And he was passionate about justice, right? He wouldn't let something just go if it prickled that notion he had of justice. He also was a great chess player, and he reignited in me an interest in learning and playing the game of chess. He was always together with his friend Raphael, and they both were roommates in the dorms right here across from class. Some time had passed in which I hadn't seen Howard. And one day I had returned to AIC. I was in the hallway, and I saw Imam Harry Muhammad, who's been associated with AIC for a very long time, who's manned that desk there, who's taking classes here, who's also been kind of an unofficial teacher to folks as well, you know, an ear to listen to. And I caught him, I think, as he was leaving. And I asked him, have you seen Howard? And he said, you know, thinking kind of, no, you know? And I asked for his number. At first, he seemed inclined to say that I don't have his number, right? And, but then at the last second, he pulled out like this black book, you know, which reminds me of my dad's black book and the black book that everyone had before cell phones and phones when landlines were still a thing. And this thing was ancient. It was like sacred in its own way, you know, this black book. And he said, no, you know what? I do. I think I have it in here somewhere. And so he opens the book and he's painstakingly just flipping through every page. He's flipping through every page. And I'm thinking in my head, like, it's going to be on the last page. And lo and behold, and I told him, like, look, you know, it's okay. I'll catch you another time, whatever. And he's like, no, I got it. And then last page, right there, he had Howard's phone number. And I took that number that night and I called Howard and I said, hey, Howard, I miss you. I would love to play chess with you. It's been a long time. And the next day in the morning, I got a missed call, and in the voicemail, there was a woman who had called, and that was Howard's daughter. She was a lieutenant in the Baltimore police. And she said, I got your message. You know, my father is sick. He has terminal cancer. He's dying, right? And so, like, I was shell-shocked. I couldn't believe that this man who I really looked up to, I enjoyed time with, was looking forward to and hoping for more time with, especially to learn those chess secrets. But more than that, just to be with him was, you know, and I thought about that time where, like, I hadn't spent with him. And so she told me the hospital that he was in, and it was on the south side, and I went down there. I was able to get to his room, and, you know, he was looking like what a person who's suffering from stage 4 cancer looks like, right? And this was really my first time, you know, seeing someone who was like on the edge of transitioning, you know? And his daughter hadn't arrived yet. None of his family had arrived yet. And it was just sad for me at that moment, very heavy on me, to think about him dying alone, you know? And so I stayed there. I played Quran with his permission. I prayed with him. He couldn't talk much except for very few words here and there sometimes. And I gave him some water. And then his daughter showed up, and we had an opportunity to talk. And after that, I never saw him again. But one of the things it made me think about, amongst the many things it made me think about, is how important it is for us to have Muslim chaplains in these institutions, in hospitals, in prisons, in universities and colleges, and other than that, right? Because there's so many of our brothers and sisters who slip through the cracks because of inadequate care and attention, right? And I want to address kind of one of the questions that I shared with, like, what is a chaplain? at the end of the day, a chaplain is like any other title. And I know brothers Chaplain Abu Noor and Omar Muzaffar say this, that it is used in so much as it kind of helps you to get the real work done that you want to get done, right? It's just a title at the end of the day, but it's about the real work of khidmah and suhbah and irshad. And that is very true. And that while it may seem like a new form of religious leadership, in fact, chaplaincy, the origins of it go back to the 40s and 50s with the Nation of Islam kind of ministers and chaplains going in to the prisons, and early Sunni organizations going into the prisons and doing this work. And Chaplain Sundas Khulaki notes that the word chaplain itself derives from a Latin word meaning cloak. And the cloak, of course, is a very poignant symbol in our deen, as well as it's associated with the prophetic story of the revelation, the first revelation, right? After the prophet was commanded, Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaqal insana min alaq, Iqra wa rabbuka al-akram, right? After this heavy, kolan thaqila, after this heavy word was laid upon to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he felt all sorts of emotions, all sorts of ways, where he just encountered Jibreel alayhi salam. He rushed down the mountain and he went to his wife Khadija radiallahu anhu and said, Zammaluni, cover me, right? And Khadija radiallahu anhu comforted him and covered him in that mantle, in that prophetic cloak, right? And so it has this profound symbolism that is very deeply connected to our tradition. And as Chaplain Dr. Bilal Ansari notes, that the duty of pastoral care is illustrated in the Quran and the Sunnah through the metaphor of the ra'i, or the shepherd. And the Prophet ﷺ says, all of you are shepherds and each of you are responsible for his flock, his or her flock. Quite often we are asked about also like the difference between an imam and a chaplain, right? This comes up often. And something that I'll share just here, there's two stark differences, even though some people carry both titles. In my view and in the view of others, like there are kind of like two stark differences. One is that imams in the U.S. are leaders of masajid, of mosques, and lead the prayer. And for that reason, the office of imam is one that is generally exclusive to men. Whereas chaplaincy is not the case. We have many sisters who are chaplains as well. And chaplaincy, another distinction with imam generally, is that chaplains will be found in institutions, leading Muslim life programs, in these institutions, hospitals, whatever I mentioned of prisons, colleges, versus the mosque. And now, I have a friend, Osama Malik, who is in Texas, and he goes by the community chaplain title. So he wears several kind of multiple hats of chaplaincy, right? And, I don't want to take up too much time, and I want to give folks kind of opportunity to ask questions. But I did want to share maybe one case, which may seem simple, but which for me was very profound and that I think we can take with us. And that's the case from when I was doing my CPE. And I'll share it now. One of the blessings that many chaplains speak about is their experience with clinical pastoral experience, CPE. CPE is a requirement for many MDiv programs, such as the one we have here at AIC. A must for anyone who treads the path of chaplaincy. The program varies, but as Dr. Salam advised me, real CPE is in the hospital. CPE can be all at once difficult, grueling, joyful, and rewarding. It can be like sujood outside of prostration. One stands bare, humble in front of the reality of suffering, or new life, and everything in between. It is closeness to the dua of the heart. You cannot help but see Allah with everything, right? This ma'iyah. You also learn a lot about yourself, your flaws, your foibles, what you need to work on, right? And you also learn that about your cohort. Sometimes the lessons continue to reveal themselves well after you are even done with CPE. One patient whom I visited shared a beautiful lesson. She let me in her room graciously. Her eyes were bright and her smile was wide. She said, "Come on in, Pastor. We shared a little bit about each other to break into conversation. She learned that I was Muslim, and it didn't bother her a bit, you know. We talked about how she was feeling. She was feeling like these feelings of pain and anxiety because she didn't know if the organ transplant that she had was going to hold, right? That it was going to work. And so most of our conversation, however, was not about her organ, but it was about her mother. That was what was on her mind at the time. It was about her mother, whom she missed a lot, as she had passed not too long ago. And she shared a memory that sticks with me to this day about how both went to a funeral for one of her mother's friends and how everyone laid flowers on the grave of the deceased. And her mother commented to her daughter, "I wish she had received her flowers when she was alive." Her daughter took the comment to heart and realized she never gave her mother flowers and didn't thank her much for everything that she had done for her growing up. She resolved from that day forward to give her mother's flowers every day, to thank her for everything she did for her, and just express how much she loved her. She said this to me with such a smile of happiness and gratitude that I shall never forget. It was like seeing a true nafsul mutma'inna, a true soul at peace. Jazakallah khair.
I'll just ask them. It's not necessarily a question, but I'm just curious about your experience of being a chaplain in an educational institution, and what are the challenges that people are facing these days versus you were facing when you were.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of similar challenges and there's some differences because it's like generation is unique in many ways as well. And we have Abu Noor here in the audience as well, and so he's been a chaplain much longer than I have at a university. But I think kind of like the doubts, or as like we call them shubahat, kind of fall in different realms, right? Like, so that's one level, right? It's like one of the challenges. Like, you go to university, you go to college for the first time, you may have a lot of self-confidence. You might have a lot of self-confidence in your beliefs, but you're going to be challenged. And not everyone is equipped or ready to kind of meet those challenges or has the support they need to meet those challenges, right? Maybe you come from a very religious household and for the first time you're encountering people who are challenging the status of the Quran or the status of prophethood and the viability of that, right? So this is a very intellectual kind of realms, right? But that's very real too. But then you also have, the things that are really do not change, and that is, finding your friends, finding your group that you are with, right? And that's very formative in your first few years, right? For some people, it's more difficult than others, right? Loneliness, right, can be a very big issue. Being exposed to the freedom of living on campus, right, versus kind of the strictures and the rules that one has at home, right? These are challenges that students face. Like, you have open access to everything that this society has to offer, and what is it within you that's going to, or your kind of peer group that's going to help you in overcoming that, meeting that, you know what I mean? Or like, lift you up when you do fall, right? Having an adult relationship with the deen of Islam, right? Versus kind of what you maybe had beforehand. People are really hungry for that in this generation, one big kind of difference key is obvious is that we didn't have social media. Facebook was just coming out when I was graduating, like the last year, and it wasn't what it is today. Right? It was a very small thing. it wasn't what it blew up into. And so like this is a generation that is really online. This is a generation that is getting Islamic information from TikTok, and I'm not saying that's all bad all the time either, because for example, I had a student who was not Muslim, who heard of Islam for the first time on TikTok, and that propelled her to want to talk to me about Islam, right? And so these are kind of some of the challenges and things that we face that probably are different, and some of the ones that are the same. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Did you want to add anything, Alumni?
Maybe just to keep the discussion going. I know you mentioned you work in the nonprofit sector.
Yeah.
You mentioned you've been chaplain at a couple different schools, a few different schools.
Yeah.
In a short period of time, you had your own experiences in the community, just growing up and as a older person as well. So I guess what I'm curious about is who as someone who has been a chaplain for a long time, but all at one institution, but all, I'm kind of curious if you feel the different environments in the Muslim community, whether it's from different colleges or between colleges and like at the outside community, do you find more continuities and similarities between the Muslim community and all those places, or do you find just the tenor of the Muslim community and the nature of it and your interaction with it very, very different in all those places?
That's a great question. I was at Georgetown, and I think if the pandemic didn't hit, I could have answered that in a richer way. But after 6 months, because Georgetown is very similar to U Chicago in many ways, but also very different because it's a Catholic institution. It has this a perspective on religion, positive perspective on religion, right? Like it advocates for spiritual life and the wholeness of the person. And again, you're a graduate of Georgetown too, so But we had the pandemic, and so it was really difficult to kind of gauge that. And there's a lot of changes that have happened in like the student body of Georgetown as well, like the rise in neo-atheism. That's probably one thing that I forgot to mention is a big difference. Even though that's kind of like when Sam Harris published his thing and he started to get in vogue, but it hadn't kind of distilled down to the student body when I was going to college. But after that, it kind of, I think, blew up. But, so I had that experience, which is a very virtual kind of experience for the most part, at Georgetown. But when I really kind of had my first full-time, I'm the chaplain here on campus, it was in Minnesota, in Northfield, at Carleton and St. Olaf Colleges. And the Muslim demographic population there is very small. It's about 50 each, and at St. Olaf it's predominantly international students. So I got a really good sense of kind of the challenges and the difficulties that international students face, or like kind of, the questions they're asking and what's new with them. But Carleton had a little more of a mix. There was more students from the United States, like there was local students from Minnesota as well. It's also on the quarter system. And so that kind of came with its own challenges because you're the chaplain at 2 campuses, right? You have to figure out kind of like when Jummah is. And there's a lot of things I really loved about that job because I got to know each student really well, and like, there was an intimate connection that kind of just happened really immediately at Carleton and St. Olaf. And I could tell there was a real hunger for a Muslim chaplain at these places because of the number of people that would kind of show up to the one-on-ones, right? Or that would hit me up even after hours. And, as a first-time chaplain, I was like really excited about this job. Like this was everything I was kind of looking for. And, Chicago came calling like earlier than I thought. Alhamdulillah. I always wanted to come back to Chicago. My family's here, I'm from here, all of these things. And the position was very appealing, and University of Chicago is a very unique place. It had a wonderful chaplain in Imam Tahir Abdullah, who kind of cemented his legacy there for 4 years. And it's very diverse. And so I think it's more of a it's more representative than Olaf and Carleton would be of the Muslim American community. But that said, also, it's just it's a very academically minded, intellectual, kind of wanting to go to the roots of issues, even though sometimes that's not always the case. I got to put a caveat, because students are going to be students. They may be really great at being critical in their majors, right? Like, whether that's science and STEM, but, there's a blind spot of like, okay, well, my religion is something that I hold on to, and I don't want to go near those questions that may jeopardize the way I've been taught what Islam is and how to think about it and all of these things. And so, I've been there 1 year, going on my second year. I think I have a better idea of the community. But I would say those are kind of like the major changes and differences between them.
Is there anything, chaplaincy is so wide, right? And is there any part of the job that you weren't expecting that you would do as a chaplain?
That I wasn't expecting to do as a chaplain. I think, sometimes there are things you think like, this isn't really in the job description, but it'll help you in your job. It'll help you in your work. You know what I mean? Like, and I think those are some of the things I kind of have to work on, is like work-life balance, and kind of, you kind of have to kind of set boundaries up. Sometimes I would get called at Olaf and Carleton or messaged very late, and sometimes it would be like a real emergency, and other times it wouldn't be, So, but I would say I don't think I have so much. Sometimes there's expectations that need to be managed. Like, how much are you going to be involved in actually putting together, for instance, Ramadan programming, right? Like, Ramadan is one of the most pivotal times of year for a Muslim chaplain, for Muslim life on a community campus, right? Like, how much are you going to put in of yourself, right? And then there's some unrealistic expectations sometimes that may be foisted upon you, and you really have to consider that, and you really have to communicate with the various leaders from student organizations, like, it's wonderful that you want to do all these things, but it also has to come from a place of care. It's like, maybe you're doing too much, right? So, I don't know if that's satisfying, but sometimes kind of managing expectations is one of the things that, I didn't know I would run into prior to that. Dr. Salem.
Little plug for AIC. Tell us how AIC prepared you for
Oh yeah,
your job.
absolutely. Yeah, I definitely talked about it a little bit.
You did all that.
Yeah. No, but I mentioned, AIC was right there in the right place at the right time, and I spoke about my pivotal conversation with you about the restructured program for chaplaincy at AIC, and everything that entails. I had questions about, can one really have a career in this? Because that's a real thing. Like, I love the idea of mission and purpose that comes with chaplaincy, but how realistic is it to have a career in this? And in talking to Dr. Salem, like, I really got a lot of answers in that. And other than that, in terms of the content of the classrooms, like, you really have a really tight cohort of fellow students that you get to learn from. The instruction was pivotal. It's come in handy, especially the spiritual care and counseling courses. When I do my one-on-one, I rely on those maxims so often, right? And, I have dozens of cases in which I feel like I can now go back to and see kind of how to learn from them, what I could do better in them, how I can approach them with the spiritual maxims that I learned in that course on caregiving. But it was, I mean, without it, I don't think I'd be here for sure. You know, the importance of CPE, you know, how Dr. Salam, you mentioned the fact that like real CPE is in the hospital, because there's like this idea some people have, I'll just do CPE online or I'll just go, but no, you know, real CPE, clinical pastoral experience, like you have to be there one-on-one, and the formation that actually has on your persona and self, and like the self work you have to do, you know, it's vital. It's vital. Yeah. And then more than that, it was like learning about fiqh al-ibadat, because those questions come up too. Like, you know, fiqh questions will come up, and you have to be conversant enough. And if you're not, knowing when to refer someone out to someone who's more qualified to answer certain questions. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you everyone for coming.
All right. So that go.